Problem management is the process that's responsible for managing the life cycle of all problems. While related to incident management, these are separate processes. Essentially, incidents deal with the restoration of service to a user, where a problem is concerned more with identifying and removing the causes of incidents. So problem management is going to help to minimize the effects of incidents caused by errors in the IT infrastructure and also to prevent their recurrence. We can see in this diagram an overview look at problem management. Here on the left, we have the different individual steps for problem management, but we also see some relationships to other processes within this diagram. And so let's speak to those first. There is a relationship directly with incident management. Incidents must provide categorization and tracking in order to provide good data for root cause analysis. So the knowledge base is going to be a solution repository for new incidents. And we're going to match incidents to known problems and errors. That's actually the first step in spotting trends, and it helps to remove errors before they affect users. Often your incidents will actually become problems is another part of that relationship. There is a relationship with configuration management and asset management. Because problem management technically relies on the configuration management process to make sure that we have timely updates of inventory and configuration item information. It uses the CMS also to identify faulty configuration items and to determine the impact of problems and resolutions. It interacts with the change management process as well. When a resolution or workaround requires a particular change management is the process that tracks and implements those requests for change, anything that's going to permanently change the infrastructure. And that process as a whole is going to prevent future problems, but sometimes the problems will interface with that. And we have a relationship with the notification process, as we see here. The notification process is simply a process and procedures that describe the management of operations for communication throughout all areas of managing notifications. And so that's certainly going to relate to problem management as well. Now let's look at an overview of the problem management process. We find that beginning here under problem record. The very first step is problem detection and recording. So that's going to involve reviewing recurring incidents, looking at major or high impact incidents and problem candidates. That's going to involve linking existing incidents with outstanding problems, known errors, possibly creating new problem records, and we'll go through the individual steps. The second step would be your problem logging, categorization, and prioritization. And the priority is going to be based on the impact that it has on the organization, the urgency with which it needs to be addressed, and the frequency that it's occurring. Due to resourcing constraints, sometimes only higher impact problems should be planned and scheduled. And that scheduling also is going to need to take into account available resources like skills, effort, the duration of time. And so all of that reasoning as to the categorization and prioritization is going to be included in the problem record and is based on the problem priority matrix. Next, you have problem investigation and diagnosis. This is aimed at identifying the root cause of the problem. Where appropriate, workarounds should be developed to enable incident management to restore the service. And different groups can be involved in order to identify a workaround and root cause. All the investigation and diagnosis steps are going to be recorded in that problem record. Problem resolution, otherwise known as the remediation plan and implementation of a solution. Once you've identified the root cause and a decision is made to resolve the problem, then the resolution should be executed. In many cases, that will involve some change management. So here we see our request for change relationship. At that point, we need to make sure that all the fields in the remediation plan are accurately completed. We've provided as many details as necessary in order to assist that process. At that point, we would get to the review and closure stage. So we would review the information that was last added to the problem record, verify that the permanent solution has removed the root cause of the problem, and then the user who initially reported the problem will be contacted to confirm that the problem no longer exists. And at that point, the situation would end, or the process, would end. So there we see a high-level view of problem management and its processes, as well as its relationships to the other standard processes. The problem management process begins with problem detection and logging. In this flowchart, we're going to see more detail about the individual steps that make up this process. As you can see, the process begins with the discovery of a problem. This could be based on periodic incident reviews. It could also be based on trend analysis, including applications, business services, infrastructure, and vendors. This would be the responsibility of a member of the IT staff, the problem manager. Or a problem could be created from an incident that has a status without a root cause and without having a resolution. So remember the relationship between incident management and problem management. It could also be a recurring incident, which tells us that our workarounds or solutions actually haven't been successful. Either of those can be the start of the problem management process. The next question is this a new problem? If it's not a new problem, then we need to locate the existing problem. Once we've located the existing problem, we need to determine if it is closed or not. If the existing problem is not closed, then we're simply relating an incident to the problem and notifying the problem analyst of the new incident relation, and that ends the process. So that's an existing problem, and we simply have a new incident to relate to it. If the existing problem is closed, we find an existing problem, but it is closed, then we need to reopen the problem. You'll need to update the status of the problem to reopened, relate the current incident to the problem, and then notify the problem analyst and problem manager and the area manager of the reopen and incident relation. If in fact it was a new problem, then you will need to record it as a new problem and complete the various fields in the problem record, and then assign the problem record status as new. That will take us to the next step in the process, which will be the investigation and diagnosis part of the problem management process. So in this flowchart, we see the initial steps that need to be taken as a part of the problem detection and logging process. Following the problem detection and logging process, we find ourselves at the beginning of the investigation and diagnosis and remediation plan process. And this flowchart is going to describe for us in more detail the steps that make up that process. This process can begin in a number of different ways. First, it might begin with a new problem or a previously closed problem that has now been reopened. It might also, though, be based on review information. And that's where we see our 3.13 new information being added to an existing problem record after the reviewing of those problems. And so that might reverse course and take us back to the start of the investigation, diagnosis, and remediation plan. Those are the ways in which we can find ourselves here in step 2.1. And step 2.1 is to review and update the problem record information. Okay, there are a number of steps here. This will be the responsibility of the IT staff with the problem assignee, who is the analyst. The first step is to create, review, and update the problem. This is going to include summary and description information. You want to record the details of the particular symptoms. You want to record the target date when the problem would be resolved, related incidents, and any changes. You need to attach any supplemental documentation, and then the status should be updated, and that can be updated appropriately. If it's a new problem, it should be updated to new. If it is a reopened, it should be updated to reopened, or if it is ongoing where you are editing an existing problem by relating a new incident to it, then that's work in progress. You need to notify the problem manager and an area manager. Now, if you're not able to do this, then we need to check to ensure that the problem info is correct. And then at that point, get that problem from the queue and update the status to a work in progress. Assuming that these steps were successful, that were a part of the initial create, review, and update problem, then it would move on to some categorization and prioritization. So we would need to determine or review. The reason that these are different is because we might not be dealing with a new problem. So sometimes you're creating and you're determining the category. Other times you're just reviewing to make sure that the category and priority are still valid. So determine or review the category, determine or review the priority, as well as the configuration items that are connected to this problem. Identify stakeholders, identify any approvers that will need to work with you as a part of this problem. That would predominantly be associated with a new problem. However, we can review those people for an existing problem as well. That takes us to step 3. And step 3 should say workaround. Is there a workaround for this incident? Or is there a workaround in the incident? If the answer is yes, then as a part of the problem management process, we should document that workaround. If the answer is no, then we need to document that it is a known error. We either have a known error for which we have not found a root cause, or we have a workaround. At that point, the primary assignee would be, or the problem assignee, would forward this information to the problem manager. The problem manager is going to review the problem record and then assign the problem. Assuming the problem info is correct, we move down to selecting a problem from the queue, updating the status to a work in progress. At that point, we move on to step 9, the investigate and diagnose. The responsibility here falls on the problem assignee, and their purpose is to attempt to find the root cause of the problem using a structured method. Once the root cause is found, then we determine whether or not a workaround is required versus a solution or a permanent fix. So we either don't know how to solve the issue and thus have to find a workaround, or we are able to resolve the problem. This information should be documented, both the investigation and the diagnosis, as well as the remediation plan, along with possible task assignments and any additional resources that might need to be added. And then we need to notify area, problem manager, and approvers in order to get this resolution or remediation plan approved. Now, it is very ideal if we were to test the solutions in a test environment. So if that is at all possible, we want to do that. We move on in the logical steps to the approval process. And so the outcome here would be your root cause analysis methods. In problem management policy, they would be flowing from step 9 into step 10. In step 10, we're going to have this review and approval of the investigation. And so stakeholders need to be consulted. This would be the responsibility of the approvers or the problem manager. They would need to review and approve the root cause analysis and remediation plan, as well as reviewing and approving the workaround, and then updating the known error database. So if the investigation is approved, then we proceed on to the resolution and closure process. If the investigation is not approved, then it needs to continue on to step 13. Step 13, there are a number of determinations that are made. We determine whether there is new problem information. We determine whether this needs to be a reassigned problem or we need to assign additional resources. Does it need to be escalated? And if so, is it a functional or hierarchical escalation? And then those decisions should be documented in the problem record. The next question is to determine if the problem is solvable. If the problem is solvable, then we'll return to 2.9 and investigate again with reassigned resources or additional resources. If the problem is not solvable, then it will continue to 3.10, which is the problem review board. So there you have the individual and slightly more detailed steps that are a part of the investigation and diagnosis and remediation plan process. The final step in the problem management process is the resolution, implementation, and closure process. And this flowchart is going to describe to us the detailed steps involved in that process. We can see that the process begins with an approved resolution, approved by your approvers and problem manager. At this point, we would step into the very first step, which is the implement remediation plan step. The responsibility here lies on the problem assignee and analyst. That individual needs to review the remediation plan to ensure that it is accurate and that it provides sufficient details on the solution, to complete the remediation plan, and then to create and assign tasks for all steps in the plan to the appropriate individuals. The outcome of this will be the initiation of change management processes, if required, and the relationship of the change to a problem. Okay? So step 3.2 is to follow the change management process if the change management is necessary. If it's not necessary, then we just move on to step 3, or I should say either following change management process, or if change management is not successful, or not necessary, then we move on to step 3, which is just an evaluation of whether or not the solution was successful. If the solution was successful, we're going to move on to step 5, which is to document the results. If it was not successful, then we move on to step 4. In step 4, we need to enter in the deployment information as well as the result and document the conclusion. And if it was not successful, then that's going to take us back to the investigation and diagnosis process in step 9 of that process. If the solution is successful, we're going to review and update the problem record. This is a part of the documentation of the results, of successful results. When we review and update that problem record, it's going to include a summary and description, related incidents and changes, as well as us needing to attach available documentation. That moves us to step 6, which is the review and update step. The responsibility here is still IT staff, the problem assignee, to review and update the category, to review and possibly update the priority, review and relate configuration items, verify stakeholders, verify the approvers. From there, it moves on to our task, which is to update the status to resolved. So you will need to close your task and enter a cause code. Also need to enter documenting the resolution and update the status of the problem to resolved along with any related incidents. They also need to be updated to resolved, and we would be notifying the area managers at that point. So we see that in step 8, notification of users, reviewing the problem information, notifying all users from any related incidents, and making sure that both the problem status as well as the incident status have been set to resolved. So we either move to 3.9 to close the problem, or we do move to 3.9 to close the problem, or potentially reopen. Okay? It is 15 days to close the problem. So we need to wait 15 days, and if the problem does not recur, no new incidents occur within that 15-day period, then we can close the problem and that ends the process. If within the 15-day period, new incidents occur, then the problem is not resolved. And so it should be forwarded to the problem review board in order to determine the action. The problem review board will be reviewing all problems and determining that corrective action. If it's an open problem, they'll ensure the progress. If it's unresolved, it'll be reviewed. If it's resolved, then we'll look at what we have learned. Okay? Any corrective actions need to be determined, and then we can update the status where that's required and notify the users or the assignee. So if there is no new information, it moves on to step 12 where we're questioning, the problem manager is questioning whether there is new information available. Okay? If yes, then we're going to move back to the beginning of process number 2, which is reviewing the problem. If no, then we're returning back to the problem review board. Step 3.10 is related here. That is also reviewing and updating the problem record, but this is actually coming from not 3.14, but step 2.14, which is an unsolvable problem. And so at that point, the review board would be looking at the summary and description, the related incidents and changes, making sure they're reviewing and possibly updating category priority CIs, and then changing the status to unsolvable. So there's a different entry point for step 10 versus step 11, which is the result of the process that we've been going through. So that gives us a detailed look at the individual steps that are a part of the resolution implementation and closure process.